There was a time when housing, or the lack of it, was near the top of the political agenda. These days, the more acute the shortage of affordable housing, the more it slips down the priority list when it comes to action. This week, the May government promised to fix our broken housing market, just as the Cameron one promised before it, and the Brown one before that. Oh yes, and the Blair one before that. And as all their promises gathered dust on the shelves of Whitehall, we continue to build far fewer homes than we need, rents soared, and young people are now more likely to watch this programme than own their own home. So why will this latest housing policy be any different? Here's Liam Halligan from The Telegraph with his take of the week.
The biggest obstacle to social progress is our broken housing market, says Sajid Javid. Fixing it means tackling some tough vested interests. The Community Secretary's right on both counts, but his housing white paper isn't up to the job. Over the last 20 years, we've built 2.5 million too few homes. That's led to soaring prices, making houses increasingly unaffordable. In the early 90s, low and middle income workers needed to save around 5% of their wages for 3 years on average to build the deposit for a first-time home. These days, they'd need 24 years of such savings. Generation Rent's frustrated, and rightly so. 10 years ago, 65% of 25 to 34-year-olds were proud owner-occupiers. Now it's less than 40%. The majority then of a generation of young adults is priced out of the property market. And of those who did buy their first home in 2015, half got help from the bank of mum and dad. And in the southeast, it was 2/3. The white paper headlines are largely about the Greenbelt, but that's a diversion. What we really need is for the big house builders that dominate the market to ease the blockage, using the planning permission they've already got. There's evidence, which the government largely accepts, of a deliberate building goes slow to keep prices and profits as high as possible. Sajid Javid promised tough measures to stop large house builders from sitting on so-called land banks. But after the white paper, their share prices soared. The UK housing market, once a source of social mobility, is now driving growing resentment. This housing market white paper promised much, but it doesn't quite stack up.
And our thanks to the students and staff at Lambeth College. Liam's with me now. Welcome back to the programme. Liz, let me come to you first. What did you make of the housing white paper?
Really disappointing. If we're going to build more homes, we need access to land, to finance. We need more competition amongst house builders. We need more options, different types of housing for older people and shared ownership. And there's nothing in it that's going to give it real teeth. And there are many things about this that concern me. That I've seen a lot in my own constituency of increasing number of people who are homeless because they're getting kicked out of the private rented sector. But actually what's happening, the key thing here is what you said about the bank of mum and dad. If you're already got parents who are better off, they give you help to get on the housing ladder. And I think it's a real problem for social mobility in this country.
Whereas if you have to do it just on your salary, it's going to be really difficult to do now because of the figures you gave. Michael, what was your reaction to the white paper?
Similar, very, very disappointing. This is a terrible crisis, and it is the worst contrast between Thatcher's Conservative government and the present Conservative government. Since the Conservatives got in the coalition in 2010, they seem to have had no interest in home ownership whatsoever. The numbers are sliding all the time. Nothing effective has been done about it at all. I mean, we used to think that the way you built a future for the Tory party, apart from anything else, was by having lots of homeowners. And I entirely agree with Liz that it is socially divisive, because there are those who will at some point get money from their parents, and then the rest who never will. I think my solution would be more radical than either Liam or Liz. I think we have to go to the public sector. I think the only way you're going to build a lot of houses very fast is by letting the public sector do it, or the assisted sector, the voluntary sector. And, you know, we don't seem to care very much about the deficit anymore. It is true that the public sector can borrow cheaply. And I wouldn't be worried about building in the public sector, because what that would do is it would reduce house prices. And in due course, you can sell public sector houses into the private sector, as we did in the past. But the urgency is to have a lot of houses quickly.
Well, you're right about young people. Home ownership among 25 to 34-year-olds has fallen by 30 percentage points in 25 years. It's quite an astounding statistically, and I want to dig into some of the issues in a moment. But let's stand back for a minute. This has been a long-running problem for the British political system, no matter who has been in power for the past 25 years, Labour or Conservative. What is it about our system that doesn't take the right decisions to release the land and the money to build more homes?
This is a cross-party issue. We need around 250,000 homes each year. That's the figure from the excellent Kate Barker report back in 2004. It's still roughly the right figure. We haven't built that many homes since the mid-80s.
We haven't been near that figure.
And back when we did build those homes, 2/3 of them were provided by the small and medium-sized enterprises that had every incentive to build quickly. Now they provide less than a fifth of our homes. A lot of it is that the big housing developers, they're now very concentrated. You know, there was a Lords report that came out in the depths of summer that said the big house builders have, quotes, all the characteristics of an oligopoly. And in my discussions with government before this white paper, and I did a long investigation into the housing market.
It was a Channel 4 documentary.
Indeed, thank you for mentioning it. I wasn't going to bring it up. There was some really tough talk, and Sajid Javid, to his credit, at the Tory party conference, I'm sure you both noticed it, he said that the big house builders were guilty of land banking, and they had a stranglehold on the market. And yet the measures in this white paper, they don't go anywhere near towards breaking that stranglehold. Or we're getting lots more planning permission coming through, Andrew, now. The planning permission is not being used nearly as quickly as it's being given. There's a big gap now between when planning permission is given and when the houses actually appear. In my view, honestly, there's a deliberate go slow here.
Right. But that deliberate go slow, they would deny it, but let's take it.
And they have denied it, and we should make that clear.
Let's accept that your position on that for the moment. And I can see how it would make a difference, but that on its own cannot be the reason that we're not building anything like 250,000 homes a year.
It used to, until recently, it was the combination of the big house builders not wanting to build quickly, plus so-called NIMBYism, so people using the greenbelt basically as a sort of ethnic cleansing mechanism to keep the great unwashed away from their neighbourhood. You know, there's more acreage given to golf courses in Surrey than there is to actual residential property. I would say, though, there's been a lot of effort in the last 5 years by a lot of councils, many of whom I talked to as part of my investigation, very few of whom would come on camera because they're scared of central government, they're scared of the house builders. They have given a lot more planning permission. You know, in the last 2 years, and I got some internal government figures on this, in the last 2 years for which we had numbers, there was a 28% increase in planning permissions granted, the number of housing units, but just a 10% increase in the number of homes.
And that's the land banking issue.
That's the land banking issue.
But it is also the issue that Michael raised, which is for years we haven't trusted councils to borrow to build socially affordable homes to rent. You know, completely unlike other parts of councils' work where they can borrow for capital investment. That would make the single biggest difference in my constituency. It wouldn't force people into unstable, increasing costly and often bad quality private rented sector.
And you get the housing benefit bill down too, right?
Absolutely.
Because it would reduce the rental.
Absolutely.
The housing bill is so high because of rents.
It's going into the private sector.
That's right.
And also, I would like to see longer term tenancies for people, particularly families. I've had lots
That
of
bit's in the white paper, though how strong it is.
Well, it's not. It's only for the new build to rent properties.
Again, that was Ed Miliband's idea.
Indeed.
Just as so was the complaint about land bank. use it or lose it was his
Indeed.
cry, and Mr. Osborne at the time said that it was a stupid idea, effectively. The green belt, a lot of which isn't green. Is it time to do a qualitative assessment of the green belt and say there are some parts that are not that green, in fact they're really quite brown? We can build there, we can create other green belts elsewhere, we can build more parks in our cities and towns, and overall it would be a plus.
Well, firstly, I think Liam is probably right that the green belt is a peripheral issue. However, it is one of these things which is very emblematic that people get very, very upset about. So I think if the government announced that it was reviewing the green belt, that would set public opinion so strongly against the whole idea of extra house building that I think it's not worth the
It would just set it back altogether.
I think there's something in that, though. The social attitudes survey does show that so-called NIMBYism is waning. You've now got increasing numbers of people who do want building in their locality, not least because nice middle-class children called Jonathan and Emily can't buy homes. This is a Tory issue now. This is a Tory issue, and I'm surprised, actually, that the Prime Minister hasn't given Javid the way through to actually do something a bit more radical. Not so much on the Greenbelt. I accept that that's... And anyway, that's the big house builders want us to have a nervous breakdown about the Greenbelt, but particularly on punitive measures, on forcing the big house builders to use planning permission. Andrew, I like free markets.
Sure, I know.
But this market is broken, so you have to intervene.
It raises a broader question, which is whether this Tory government is too busy with Brexit to be a Tory government.
I think there's a lot in that.
I think Conservatives are very worried about that.
But here's the rub, and it's a depressing one. Is there not a pretty good chance that things will not get better?
I think Michael's right and Liz is right. We do need a mixed economy solution. We do need more socially provided houses. And actually, they've gone up from the hundreds to the thousands, the low single-digit thousands.
Not quite the 300,000 Harold Macmillan built when he was housing minister.
But raising the cap would help build about 60,000.
That's right. And
It would be a lot more than that.
The housing association model is a fantastic model that can work and does do good work. But in the end, it's the private sector that's going to provide the majority of these homes. And the private sector, I'm afraid, has every incentive to build slowly in order to keep prices high.
And allow the price to go up and then make more.
Indeed. It's not just existing homeowners that want high prices. The Treasury wants high prices. They get the stamp duty. And here's something you don't hear very often, Andrew. The banking sector wants high house prices because they're up to their neck in property loans. And ministers are being whispered in their ear, if house prices come down, the banks could collapse.
Because it was on their balance
Iron
sheets.
triangle of interest who wants high house prices.
Well, Mrs May has said she wants to help the just about managing, so you've set a challenge for her tonight on housing. Thank you, Liam.